त्रिवरधारी गोपीजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यमुना तीर वनचारी यमुना तीर वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्णा जय राधा नील माधव राधा नील माधव श्री राधे जय पंचतत्व जय पंचतत्व जय पंचतत्व जय पंचतत्व हरि बोल नित्य गौर हरि बोल जय जय प्रभुपाद जय जय प्रभुपाद जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य स्तोत्र शतश्री श्रीमद His Divine Grace अभय चरणारविंद भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshvabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nandagopakumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna, we welcome all the devotees for today's morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. We are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, third chapter, text number 1. Shri Shuka Uvacha Evam metan nigaditam Prishtavan yadbhavan mama Nrinam yanbriyamananam Manushyeshu manishinam. Shri Shuka Uvacha Evam metan nigaditam Prishtavan yadbhavan mama Nrinam yanbriyamananam Manushyeshu manishinam. Shri Shuka Uvacha Evam metan nigaditam Prishtavan yadbhavan mama Nrinam yanbriyamananam Manushyeshu manishinam. Shri Shuka Uvacha Evam metan nigaditam Prishtavan yadbhavan mama Nrinam yanbriyamananam Manushyeshu manishinam. Shri Shuka Uvacha Evam metan nigaditam Prishtavan yadbhavan mama Nrinam yanbriyamananam Manushyeshu manishinam. Shri Shuka Uvacha Shri Shukadeva Goswami said, Evam, so, etat, all these, nigaditam, answered, Prishtavan, as you inquired, Yat, what, Bhavan, your good self, Mama, unto me, Drinam, of the human being, Yat, one, Mriyamananam, on the threshold of death, Manushyeshu, amongst the human beings, Manishinam, of the intelligent men. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. Srila Shukadeva Goswami said, Maharaj Parikshit, as you have inquired from me as to the duty of the intelligent man who is on the threshold of death, so I have answered you. Purport. In human society all over the world, there are millions and billions of men and women, and almost all of them are less intelligent because they have very little knowledge of spirit soul. Almost all of them have a wrong conception of life, for they identify themselves with the gross and subtle material bodies, which they are not, in fact. They may be situated in different high and low positions in the estimation of human society, but one should know definitely that unless one inquires about his own self beyond the body and the mind, all his activities in human life are total failures. Therefore, out of thousands and thousands of men, one may inquire about his spirit self and thus consult the revealed scriptures like the Vedanta Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, and Srimad Bhagavatam. But in spite of reading and hearing such scriptures, unless one is in touch with a realized spiritual master, he cannot actually realize the real nature of self, etc. And out of thousands and hundreds of thousands of men, someone may know what Lord Krishna is in fact. What Lord Krishna is in fact. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya 20, 122 and 123, it is said that Lord Krishna, out of his causeless mercy, prepared the Vedic literatures in the incarnation of Vyasadeva for reading by the intelligent class of men in a human society, which is almost totally forgetful of the genuine relation with Krishna. Even such an intelligent class of men may be forgetful in their relation with the Lord. The whole Bhakti Yoga process is therefore a revival of the lost relation. This revival is possible in the human form of life, which is obtained only out of the evolutionary cycle of 8,400,000 species of life. The intelligent class of human beings must take a serious note of this opportunity. Not all human beings are intelligent, so the importance of human life is not always understood. Therefore, Manishinam, meaning thoughtful, is particularly used here. A Manishinam person like Maharaj Parikshit must therefore take to the lotus feet of Lord Krishna and fully engage himself in devotional service, hearing, chanting, etc. of the holy name and pastimes of the Lord, which are all Harikathamrita. This action is especially recommended when one is preparing for death. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupah Kada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroh Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamshta Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamshta Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे नमो महावदान्याय कृष्ण प्रेम प्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्ण चैतन्य नाम्ने गौरत्विषे नमः हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधो दीनबंधो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. Hare Krishna. We welcome all the devotees for today's morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. I'd like to take the blessings of all the assembled devotees, especially His Grace Sadayu Prabhu, before speaking on this verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are discussing from the second canto, third chapter, text number 1. We are beginning a new chapter today of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So, the first two chapters of the second canto threw light on how Shukadev Goswami answered the two basic questions that Parikshit Maharaj asked at the end of the first canto in the 19th chapter. So those two questions, as all of us know, was that Yat Chrotavyam Atho Japyam Yat Kartavyam Rubhi Prabho Smartavyam Bhajaniyam Va Puruhi Yadva Viparyayam. What is to be chanted, what is to be heard, what is to be remembered by a person in all walks of life, and especially for a person who is close to death, right? Ata prichami samsiddhim yoginam paramam gurum purushasyeha yat karyam briyamanasya sarvatha. So especially for one who is very close to death, Maranasanna. So very close to death, what should he do and what should he not do? Right? The basic rules and regulations. There is no religion without rules and regulations. His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu says that the quality of a religion can be evaluated by the quality of the rules and regulations that that particular religion professes, right? So when we analyze the Abrahamic religions, we can see what kind of rules and regulations those particular religions profess, as opposed to the Dharmic religions, right? Even within the Dharmic religions, recently I was hearing Radhesham Prabhu who was explaining, who was quoting a particular statement of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Who has analyzed all the religions of the world, and he says that that religion which accepts a common father, right? He said like that religion which accepts a common father and which accepts a means to reach that father, that can be considered as a bona fide religion. And he was saying that even though we may belong to Sanatana Dharma, there are so many so-called variations within Sanatana Dharma that we do not fall into this particular definition of religion, actual religion. But as against this, Christianity and Islam, they actually satisfy these two criteria. They accept a common father and they have some means which they profess to reach that common father, right? So anyway, a religion can be analyzed by the kinds of rules and regulations that it professes. So Parikshit Maharaj, being a very inquisitive follower of the Vedas, he wants to know what is the rules and regulations that one is supposed to follow in all walks of life, and especially for one who is very close to death. He's actually asking two general questions over here, right? He may be embarrassed to ask a question on his own behalf. That no, he might have directly asked, "What is my duty?" Right? What should I do at this point of time or at this point in my life? Because I'm very close to death, just 7 days remaining. What should I do? But because he is a king, and because there are many others who are assembled over there, right? He's not the only person who is hearing Shukadev Goswami. As soon as all the sages of the who were there in the different parts of the world, they came to know that Parikshit Maharaj is leaving his body. All of them, they assembled. And therefore, on behalf of all of them, he's asking this question in a general manner, right? But Shukadev Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj, they are perfectly in sync with each other. So Shukadev Goswami understands the intention behind that question, right? So what usually happens when there is no targeted audience, we see, right? It's quite difficult for both the student as well as the teacher, right? I remember when I was doing my engineering, at that point in time, during our mathematics classes, the teacher used to find it very tough to teach the same concept to everybody, because there were few people who are very quick in grasping the concepts, and they were very impatient if the teacher does all the different steps, right? All the different steps, if he does on the board, they were quite impatient. On the other hand, those who are not very, they could not grasp those concepts very fast, they needed all those steps, right? So I was just remembering that example, that here actually Shukadeva Goswami wants to directly address Parikshit Maharaj, but he also has to satisfy all the other sages that are assembled over there. And therefore he mentions these two paths that general people take, right? Not necessarily a devotee. The one who actually meditates on the Paramatma, he takes to the process of Sadhyo Mukti. And the other person who meditates on the Virat Rupa, he takes to the process of Krama Mukti. These two do not necessarily fall under the devotees category, right? Why is he saying this? Just to satisfy all the other sages that are present in that assembly. But then later on, towards the end of the second chapter, we see that he gives a direct answer to Parikshit Maharaj, right? He says that devotional service is the way. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says in his commentary to this verse, Mriyamananam nrinam krityam yat prishtam tad etad yogamate sritidvayam nigatitam. Nigatitam means I have answered. Sritidvayam means two paths I have given. To whom? That does not belong to the devotee category, to the general mass of people, to all the other persons who take to the yoga process. I have given these two paths. But he says ahead, Tatha Teshveva Manusheshu madhye ye manishinaha. That is the word, that is the last word of this shloka. Manishinaha. Manishinaha means really intelligent. The really intelligent take to the process of bhakti. So the really intelligent, what do they do? When they are close to death, mriyamanaha tesham bhavadvidhanam, he says directly. That directly refers to Parikshit Maharaj. Bhavadvidhanam. To devotees like you, I don't recommend the first two processes, that is Sadhyo Mukti or Krama Mukti. I don't recommend that process to devotees like you. He says, Bhavadvidhanam evam etat Shravana Kirtana Smarana Kathamritadi Nigaditam. So towards the end of the chapter, we saw nearly 6 to 7 verses which talk about direct devotional service. And that is actually meant for devotees like Parikshit Maharaj. Right? So Parikshit Maharaj, as he is in fully sync with Shukadev Goswami, could understand that these particular verses are meant directly for me. Right? I need to engage directly in indirect devotional service. So in other words, the answer that Shukadev Goswami had given to the first question that Parikshit Maharaj had asked, Yat Shrotavyam Atho Japyam, what is to be heard, chanted, and remembered for a person, for any common person. The answer that he gave was Etan Nirvidyamananam Harir Namanu Kirtanam, right? So that is chanting and hearing, everything should be directed towards the Lord, right? So in other words, what I want to say is that the sadhana and sadhya for a devotee is the same. Why? Because for a person who is in any walk of life, he's saying the same thing, right? Etan Nirvidyamananam Harir Namanu Kirtanam. And so similarly, for a person who is very close to death, if he really intends to progress on the path of bhakti, then again he should engage in Shravana Kirtana Smarana Kathamritadi Nigaditam. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says. So the Upeya and the Upaya both are the same for a devotee. So this verse especially throws light on how human life is actually a very responsible life. That's how Prabhupada writes in the purport, right? He throws importance on, because there are two words in the verse which talk about human beings, right? Nrinam and Manusheshu. So both of them, they talk about human beings. And therefore, Prabhupada says that human life is a very responsible life. In a lecture that he has given, that Srila Prabhupada has given on this verse, he says, anybody can understand that human life is very special and very important. Just like when cats die or dogs die, right? Nobody cares. So many rats die in our temple also, right? We lift it with our finger and just throw it away, right? Is there any ceremonies that we do for the rat? Prabhupada asks like that in his lecture. Do we perform any ceremonies for the rat, Antyashti or something we do for the rats or cats or dogs? No, we don't do any such thing. But when a human being dies, there are so many procedures to be followed. Why? Because human life is a very responsible life. It's a very important life, right? And within the human life, Prabhupada says that there are many, many different categories of humans, but those who have a particular set of rules and regulations that they follow. Because Bhagavad Gita 16th chapter says, Pravrittimcha nivrittimcha jana na vidurasuraha, na shaucham na pichacharo na satyam teshu vidyate. Pravritti and nivritti. Pravritti means the do's and the nivritti means the don'ts. That's how Prabhupada explains that verse. Pravritti means the do's and nivritti means the don'ts. So those who are in a bona fide religion, they have a bona fide set of rules and regulations. And therefore, you can call them as demigodly or godly. But those who don't have any bona fide set of rules and regulations, they are asuras, or they are the demons. So demons can be very easily identified because they don't want to follow any rules and regulations, or even though they may be knowing that these rules and regulations need to be followed, but they don't follow those rules and regulations, right? So therefore, Prabhupada says that what is our duty and what is not our duty. Modern civilization does not throw light on what kind of duties need to be taught to children right in the young age. And ahead, he says that etad viditva ya prayati sabrahmanaha. So one who has understood the importance or the value of human form of life, and then he leaves the body. Yep, prayati means he leaves the body. He is called a Brahmana. But yaha aviditva prayati sa kripanaha. Prabhupada says that kripana means a miser is one who does not understand what the value of human form of life is, and then he leaves his body. Therefore, we see that in almost all of our Vedic scriptures, especially the Srimad Bhagavatam, so much of light is being thrown, and so much of discussion takes place on death, right? Chaitanya Chandru says that Srimad Bhagavatam throws light on the art of dying, right? Not the art of living, but art of dying. So much of discussion takes place in the Srimad Bhagavatam on the art of dying, and the backdrop of the Bhagavatam itself is that Parikshit Maharaj is going to die in 7 days. So, with this being the case, what is the duty of a dying man? Because during just the last moments before death, or the last few days before death, or the last few months before death, actually a person goes through a lot of suffering. I don't know how many of you have actually seen a person, dying, or the last days of a person. It is actually horrible, right? Pregoram Prabhu has seen many cases like. So it's actually very horrible, right? It's quite horrible. I'm sure in all of our houses, when all of our elders, they went through the natural process of of death, natural process of death, as in they completed their life and then they left their bodies. So the last days or the last months before death is actually very horrible, right? So as Kulashekar also says, prana prayana samaye kapavata pittaihi, right? So kapha, vata, and pitta, all three. Avarodhana, kantava, arodhana vidhau, smaranam kutaste. Avarodhana means to stop. So the kapha, vata, and pitta, they stop a person from chanting the holy names towards the end of life, because the throat is completely filled with kapha, vata, and pitta, mucus, bile, and hair. So what kind of sound will come out of that person's life? Kulashekar Alvar asks. This is actually depicted very beautifully in one of the pastimes of Ramanujacharya. I'm sure all of you have heard, but I'd just like to mention that particular incident of that pastime. That when Ramanujacharya's spiritual master, Mahapurna, he performed the final rites of a Shudra. His name was Maraneri Nambi. He was actually one of the he was the god brother of Mahapurna actually. He was one of the very close disciples of Yamunacharya, Maraneri Nambi. And when Mahapurna performed those final rites, at that point of time, we know that entire society rejected him, because that was the custom in those days, that the Shudras are not supposed to come in contact with the Brahmanas. So the entire society rejected him, and therefore Mahapurna, along with his daughter Attulai, right, they were outside the city. They had been cast out of the city, the entire city of Srirangam. They were outside the city. They were very close to the place where they performed the Antyeshti, the final rites. So Ramanujacharya comes there. We know about that. So he inquires, and Mahapurana explains that what is wrong. That even Ramachandra performed the final rites of Jatayu. At least this person belongs to the Shudra caste. Jatayu is a vulture, right? And we see in the Mahabharata that Yudhishthir Maharaj performs the final rites of Vidura. Vidura also so-called was a Kshatriya, was a Shudra by birth, right? So therefore, why should I not perform the same rites? So after that, Ramanujacharya accepts that particular argument that Mahapurana throws. But thereafter, Mahapurana asks one particular question, very important question. He says that generally it is the custom that when a person who is very close to death, he leaves his body, chanting the holy names even feebly, then I understand that he has gone back to the spiritual world. But I was very close to this person, Maraneri Nambi, when he left the body. He was in my lap, in fact. He was in my lap, and, I was actually taking very good care of him. But he, no holy name came out of his mouth when he left the body. So how can I understand that he has gone back to the spiritual world? He asks this question, very pertinent question he asks Although he has performed the final rites, everything is done by this time. But he asked his own disciple, Ramanujacharya, about, why this happened. And how can I understand that he has gone back to Yamunacharya or gone back to Vaikuntha? He asks like that. So Ramanujacharya, he knows the answer to this question perfectly well. You know why? Because this was the question which he asked to Varadaraj himself. And he got the answer from Varadaraj, right? 6 questions that he asked to Varadaraj. One of those questions was the same question, that does a devotee need to remember you? He doesn't ask whether a devotee needs to chant your holy names even. Does a devotee need to remember you at the end of his life in order to come back to you? And then in response, Varadaraj says, he says that Antima Smriti Varjanam, he says. That means there is no necessity. If a devotee can remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead at the end of his life, well and good. But otherwise, there is no particular necessity. There is no compulsion. It is not mandatory for a devotee of Krishna to remember him at the end of his life. But what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita seems to be contradictory to this, right? Krishna makes it very clear. Antakale cha mameva smaran muktva kalayarvaram yaprayati samadbhavam yati nastyatra samshayah. Very, very clear in 5 and 6. 8th chapter, 5th and 6th verses, is makes it very, very clear that he has to remember me. Only then he can come back to me. But the same Krishna, when he comes as Varadaraja, is saying like this. So how do you reconcile both of these statements, right? So Ramanuja says at that point in time, he quotes from the Varaha Purana and explains how to reconcile both of these statements, right? So the Varaha Purana, because many of us, even me, including me, we have never read the Varaha Purana. So what is the Varaha Purana? Varaha Purana is a conversation between Lord Varahadev and Bhumi Devi. So when Hiranyaksha, he put the entire, globe of Mother Earth into the Garbhodaka ocean, and then when Varahadev came, he reinstated Mother Earth and then killed Hiranyaksha. There takes place this conversation between Lord Varaha and Bhumi, right? The Mother Earth. So Mother Earth asks this question, that I, as the goddess of entire Mother Earth, even I was put into such a difficulty, right, in this world by a demon, right? Then what is the, position of a common man or a common woman in this world? If I, as, I representing all the Jiva Tattva in this world, I have been put into such great difficulty by such a demon, then what is the position of what to speak of a common man? How can he, attain you at the end of his life? This question was asked by Bhumi to Varaha. So what Varaha says in response, you can all please repeat after me. Sthite manasi suswasthe sharire sati yo naraha dhatu samye sthite smarta vishwarupancha mamajam tatastam riyamanam stu काष्टपाषाण सन्निभम अहम स्मरामि मद्भक्तम नयामि paramam gatim. He says that sthite manasi susvasthe, when our mind, is free from all kinds of disturbances, right? So he talks about both the bodily disturbance as well as the mental disturbance in this verse, not just about the bodily disturbance. So when our mind is relatively, of course, it can never be completely, free of all disturbances. But when it is relatively free of all disturbances, when, we don't have to bother for our basic necessities of life, because those outside, they have to, actually slog so hard for just the basic necessities of life. But all of us, we are not in such a situation, right? Even though we may have so many other mental disturbances, but still we are relatively free from all other disturbances. So sthite manasi suswasthe sharire satiyo naraha. And when the body is free from all, if not free from all diseases, but relatively free from all disturbances, at that point of time, dhatu samye sthite smarta. Dhatu means the joints of the body are functioning well. Because in old age, what happens is that the joints, they get dislocated one by one, and then thereafter the entire body, cripples down. So when the joints of the body are in place, and when the the body itself in place, and the mind also is relatively free from all disturbances. Vishwarupam cha mamajam. One should actually meditate on my eternal form. Varadev is saying to Bhumi Devi that when one is in youth, when one has a youthful body, or even when he is in middle age, and his body and mind are relatively free from all disturbances, he should actually meditate on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If this happens, this is the condition. This is a condition which has to be satisfied. If this happens, then the second shloka will work. What is the second shloka? Tatastam Riyamanam stu. When that person, much ahead, when that person is on the deathbed, Mriyamanam means he's just about to die. Mriyamanam tu Kashtapashana Sannibham. And what is his position? It is like that of a log of wood. Kashta means a log of wood. Pashana means a stone or a rock, right? That means he's immovable, almost immovable. He cannot even move at that point in time, right? So at that point in time, what can he remember? What thoughts will come to his mind? All thoughts will be concentrated on the pain that he's experiencing only. Or still, he may, all those, akarma, not what do you call that? Papa karma that he has done, all the wrong activities that he has done throughout his life, all that will come to his mind at that point in time. What can he remember? The Supreme Personality of Godhead. But that does not matter. Varadev says, he says, Aham Smarami Madbhaktam. That I will remember my devotee and Nayami Paramam Dhatim. I will take him back to the spiritual world. He does not need to bother about that, because when he had the facility, when he had the opportunity to render devotional service to me, he made complete use, full use of that opportunity, and he rendered full devotional service to me when he actually had that facility with him, and when his body was powerful enough to execute devotional service. But now, because he cannot remember me, I will take care of him, and I will remember him and take him back to the spiritual world. So Ramanuja says to Mahapurna that the verse of Gita, that is Antakale Chamameva, that emphasizes the absolute necessity of Antima Smriti for the non-surrender devotee. Says, for a general person, for a person who has not surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he has not accepted a bona fide spiritual master, he is not engaged in the process of bhakti, and he is not under the care of any devotee. For that kind of a person, for a general person, because Bhagavad Gita is not spoken only for devotees, right? It is a general scripture that everybody refers. Even Christians and Muslims read Bhagavad Gita today, right? For a comparative, analysis of religions. There are many institutions today which teach all the three sacred scriptures. They teach Bible, they teach Quran, they teach Bhagavad Gita as well, right? So it is not a specific scripture addressed to only devotees, right? Of course, Arjuna was an audience, was the main audience, but it was addressed to everybody. And therefore, it talks in general that a person who is not surrendered to the lotus feet of the Lord, to him, the Antima Smriti, that the final remembrance of the Lord is absolutely necessary. But on the other hand, what Varadaraj is saying is, he talks about the absolute unnecessity of Antima Smriti for the surrendered devotee. Absolute unnecessity as in, not that, if the remembrance of the Lord comes automatically, he has to stop it. Not like that. But if it is not necessary, it is not mandatory, because the Lord himself remembers. And there is another difference. He says that in the case that the Gita describes, Antima Smriti at the time of Prayana Kala is required to be induced by the Jiva by his own effort. Right? He has to do everything by his own effort. That amidst all that pain that is undergoing, that which is equivalent to 40,000 scorpions biting one simultaneously, amidst that, what he has to do is, he has to put his own effort in remembering the Lord, which is almost nearly impossible. Right? But on the other hand, what Lord Varadaraj is saying, that what he described to Kanchi Purana was that Antima Smriti induced by the Lord himself, and no swaprayatnam on the part of the dying jiva involved. That the Lord himself remembers, and therefore there is no effort, individual effort by the devotee at hand. Right? So this particular chapter, the third chapter of the second canto, is actually a very important chapter. At the same time, it's a very interesting chapter. Why? Because as Krishna discusses the futility of demigods worship in the seventh chapter, especially of the Bhagavad Gita, 7:20 to 23, he discusses in detail, and all the acharyas have given very elaborate commentaries on these four verses, right? The futility of demigod worship. So similarly, Shukadev Goswami is discussing the futility of demigods worship in this chapter. In the next six verses, verses 2 to 7, all of which have a common purport. He actually discusses in detail about the futility of demigods worship. So although Prabhupada gives the name of this chapter as pure devotional service, the change in heart, of course it does talk about it, but Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, what title he gives is the futility of demigod worship. So in a verse, in the form of a verse, he summarizes the entire chapter. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, you can just repeat after me this verse. Tritiye tu nrinam kshulla फलैवान्यसुरार्चना तथैवेन्द्रिय वैफल्यम चोक्तम भक्तिम ऋते हरेः Tritiye, the third chapter of the second canto, what is discussed in detail is that Nrinam Kshulla Phala Eva Anya Surarchana. Anya Sura. Sura means demigods and all other demigods. Because many times we refer to Krishna also as a Devata. Right? Krishna is considered a Pradhana Devata. Right? So Anya Surarchana, except for worship of Hari, all other kinds of worship directed towards the other demigods. Kshulla Phala, that gives only insignificant and trivial rewards. But on the other hand, tathaiva indriya vaiphalyam, and also it also talks about indriya vaiphalyam, that how engaging in sense gratification beyond measure is also it also gives kshulla rewards or insignificant rewards. Choktam bhaktim rite. Rite means except for. Rite means except for worship of Hari. All other kinds of worship, whether it be directed towards the demigods. And why is he talking about Indriya Vaiphalyam? Because we saw already in the first and second chapter how each sense has a particular sense Devata, right? A sense Devata responsible for that particular sense. So the Devatas, if one engages in general demigod worship for acquiring something, or he engages in particular demigods worship in order to increase his sense gratification, right? So both are, both reward very trivial rewards. So that is what is discussed in the third chapter of the second canto. So Prabhupada in his purport, because a few minutes are remaining, I would just like to mention a few points from the purport of Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada says that in spite of reading and hearing all the scriptures like Vedanta Sutras, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, unless one is in touch with the realized spiritual master, he cannot realize the real nature of self, etc. So Prabhupada is quoting that very famous verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita. Maya Krishna Nahi, Maya Mugdha Krishna Nahi, Swata Krishna Jnana, Maya Mugdha Jiver Nahi, Swata Krishna Jnana, Ajive Kripai Kaila, Krishna Veda Puran, right? So in order to show mercy on all the living entities, Krishna has given the Vedic scriptures. And Prabhupada is mainly quoting three of those Vedic scriptures, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam and the Vedanta Sutras, he's saying. So in this lecture, the lecture that he has given on this verse, he says that, reading the Vedanta Sutras is not anybody's cup of tea, right? But reading Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, anybody can do, he says. Right? Because especially Prabhupada has given such beautiful commentaries on Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam, and therefore he can very easily go through these scriptures. And not just that, he has to learn these scriptures from a bona fide spiritual master. Unless one accepts a bona fide spiritual master, he will not be able to get to know the actual meaning of this literature. And therefore, Prabhupada concludes his purport by saying, who is a Manishi? Manishi means an intelligent person. And Prabhupada calls a Manishi as a thoughtful person. A thoughtful person like Maharaj Parikshit takes to the lotus feet of Lord Krishna and fully engages himself in devotional service, hearing, chanting, etc., which are all Hari Kathamrita. So, Balram Shakti Prabhu says that a really intelligent person, he will take to bhakti. That is the title that he gives to this verse. A really intelligent person. Manusheshu Manishinam. So Shukadev Goswami, although he was speaking in general, later on he directed his answers specifically to Parikshit Maharaj, and he said that devotees like you, when they approach the final days of their life, there is no other method that I will tell you, right? There is no special method that I will give you, except for all that you have been doing your whole life, right? Parishit Maharaj, throughout his life, he has been doing the same thing, Hare Namanu Kirtanam. And towards the end of this life, he has to continue the same thing. There is no special, method. There is no extra, method that I will give you, but it's the same thing that you have been doing all throughout your life. That is the thing that you are supposed to do, even when you are close to death. So that is how Prabhupada concludes his purport. Hare Krishna. So we have come to the end of our class. So if anybody wants to pass any comments, or if anybody wants to comment or ask any questions, you're welcome to, or we will end our class here. Yes.
In that context, you were mentioning that Sanatan Dharma also may not profess common father and one process, one path.
Few variations of Sanatan Dharma, I was saying.
A few variations.
Variations, as in Radhesham was specifically mentioning about those, philosophies within Sanatana Dharma, which say that I am God, like Mayavad or Advaitavad. They are inferior to Christianity and Islam. I was saying. This is what Bhaktivinoda Thakur says. This is not what Radhesham is saying also. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says this. Why? Because Christianity and Islam accept a common father, and they accept subservience to that common father, and they have a path which they profess to reach that father, right? But Mayavadis, it's not like that. So therefore, these kinds of religions, sub-religions within the Sanatana Dharma, which talk that, you can become God, I can become God, these are actually inferior to Christianity and Islam.
Is it Advaita and that something more also there?
He was specifically referring to that. I have not read that literature. I don't even know from where he was quoting this. From which literature of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Maybe others who have read, they may know. But I don't know exactly from where he was quoting this. But this point just struck me, so I just mentioned that. Ruji, you may... Okay. Yeah. Shikshamrit. Chaitanya Shikshamrit. Okay. Okay. Any other comment?
Like one who is in the Vedic paradigm is better than other person who is maybe moralist also, but is not better than something like that.
Yeah. So once Prabhupada was asked this question, all of us, I guess we must have heard that conversation where Prabhupada was asked, there is a demigod worshipper in India, and I was just referring to in general, demigod worshipper, and there is a person belonging to a different religion like Islam or Christianity. So who is better? And all devotees, they say that all the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, they were expecting that Srila Prabhupada will say that the other person is better than the demigod worshipper. But Prabhupada said the reverse, that the demigod worshipper is better than the person, the Christian or Muslim or whoever. And then Prabhupada explained that he falls in the Vedic paradigm. And because he falls in the Vedic paradigm, there is every opportunity that in the near future, he will come to pure devotional service. But the others who do not even follow in the Vedic paradigm, for them, there is, there's very little hope that they will come to the path of pure devotional service, right? All of us preach. When we preach, we only, usually get the demigod worshippers only, right? All of us used to worship demigods before, right? with incomplete knowledge, right? So with incomplete knowledge, we were worshipping the demigods. So they, when they come to the path of pure devotional service, they understand the philosophy completely, and they can take to it with full heart. But for others who are on other paths, right, it is very difficult for them, right? Even if they get to know what is the proper philosophy, there are so many restrictions, societal restrictions, family restrictions, everything, which prevents them from coming to this path, right? And therefore, Prabhupada was talking. So, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, what he is saying, we can say it may seem that it is contradictory what Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying and Prabhupada is saying. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur is just, analytically analyzing. I guess how I reconcile this is that analytical analysis of all the different religions. But Srila Prabhupada, more on the practical point of view, is saying that, he's throwing light on what actually happens, right? For a person belonging to another faith, there is almost zero chance of his coming to the path of pure devotional service. But one who has taken birth in a so-called Hindu family, he can very easily take to devotional service. I guess that's how we can reconcile both of them. Anything you want to add? Okay. So we'll end our class here.